Nissan is a company that has quite the history and tumultuous modern era. This is a company that gave us the absolutely fantastic R34 Skyline and is now known for some big Ultima energy. There's a lot to digest here since the company has had some amazing highs and some crazy lows, like when their CEO snuck out of the country. Let's jump in though and look at the good, bad, and ugly of Nissan. Starting with the good, I gotta be honest, I'm a giant Nissan fanboy. I mean, I'm wearing a Nissan shirt here after all, and I have two Nissans in my garage. Ever since I was a kid, I loved Nissan's cars from the late 80s through the 90s, and that's where we're gonna start here with Nissan's cars. During the late 80s and 90s, Japan was experiencing a technological boom and money was flowing. From 1985 to 1995, the GDP, which is the gross domestic product of Japan, grew by almost 5 times. So the GDP is an economic indicator and a higher number is better to show an economy is doing well. So times were good in Japan and people were rich. That's when we saw many JDM legends get born because people had money to spend and companies had money to invest and develop these new platforms. For Nissan, that would be the S13 and the R34 Skyline at the forefront. All these were the start of some amazing years to come and models that followed. Both the S13 and the R34 became a tuner's dream with untapped potential from the factory and a platform that took very well to modifications. The S13 became the poster child of drifting around the world, and the R34 GTR was given the nickname Godzilla after it started dominating races and made some Australians cry crocodile tears. Both of these cars are powered by some absolutely legendary power plants as well, with the SR20 DET and RB26 DETT being the cream of the crop of both of those cars. Both of these engine options can make some serious power with bolt-ons and some increased boost. Forged internals, they make absolute monsters when it comes to 4 and 6 cylinder engines. They're also two of the best sounding motors in my opinion, which just adds to their charm. Nissan also produced some amazing cars during this time, such as the Pulsar GT-IR, Zafiro, and the Laurel. And the Gloria is in there as well, just to name a few. The late 80s through the 90s were really the golden era when it comes to Nissan, in my opinion. Jumping a few decades ahead brings us to another good aspect of Nissan, and that is the R35 GTR. When the R35 first came out, it was a technological wonder and would absolutely spank cars, which were twice the price at the time. This was also a giant step forward for Nissan and gave them a supercar to actually call their own. And there's a lot of cool marketing to it also, because these were like hand-built cars from a big manufacturer, and they even had like the name on of who built the motor. The R35 has been around for quite a while with some minimal changes. I know a lot of you would like to see this as a bad thing, but honestly the car is just really, really good. They also take some modifications extremely well, and within the last 5 years, people have really started to truly unlock the potential sitting under the hood of the GTR. 1,000 horsepower GTRs almost seem to be normal now, and the stuff some folks are doing down in Texas is pretty much mental with a VR38 DETT motor. They just make some stupid power. All right, next on the good list, I would like to put Nissan's VQ series of engines. I know this isn't as sexy as the SR20 or the RB, and those were already mentioned before as being good, but Nissan's VQ series of engine is pretty extensive and ranges from 2 liters to 4 liters with a bunch in between with turbo and non-turbo applications. All these options mean that these engines are in a lot of different vehicles from Nissan and their big pimp and luxury brand of Infiniti. The most common car you're probably thinking of when you hear VQ is the 350 or maybe the 370Z. The VQ might sound a bit like a trumpet, but these motors are troopers. They aren't perfect, like nothing's perfect, but I've personally seen them get the absolute piss beat out of them, and just with some normal maintenance, they keep on going. With some intakes, make it sound a little better, and exhaust, it's even better than that. Plus, you gotta get that Tomei on there, bro. It's kind of like a meme at this point. Another part of the good for Nissan has to be their Z lineup and lineage of those cars. This series of cars started way back in 1969 with the Fairlady Z. Throughout the life of the Z series, Nissan has kept this as a 2-door sports car with a longer hood and a smaller passenger compartment a little bit towards the rear of the car. Each generation of the Z has had its own unique quirks, but was also a good representation of the era when it came to styling. I'd say the 370Z has overstayed its welcome a bit, but we'll get to that a little bit later. We're awaiting the launch of the new Z, but from everything I've seen, I'm really liking this car a lot. Mark my words, but I think it's going to be one of the hottest cars to tune and modify after its launch because of its untapped potential coming from the factory, knowing Nissan's history. Lastly, in the good section, we gotta talk about Nismo. This is Nissan's factory tuning group focused on making Nissans go fast and turn better. Nismo was found in the Amori plant at Nissan, and the folks working there are responsible for some of the most sought-after Nissans ever. such as the R34 Skyline 400R, S14 270R, and the R34 Skyline GTR Z-Tune. Nissan has a history in racing, and Nismo's carried them to the forefront on the track and made Nissans more desirable on the street. But it ain't all good with the Nissan, folks. No. Let's start smelling through the dirty laundry and go through the bad of Nissan. CVT transmissions and Nissan suck. Gonna say it. For real, these things are not fun to live with and less fun to drive. They're also known as being the most unreliable things in the world sometimes as well. If you don't know what a CVT transmission is, it's essentially a transmission that constantly regulates the gear chosen for the driving at hand. This thing switches ratios on what the computer tells it to, so it's basically always wondering where it should be and what gear it should be in. The reason I'm throwing Nissan CVT transmissions into the bad section is really because they just don't work well and sometimes don't even work at all in brake. Nissan was aware of some issues, but seemed to ignore them or put them off for quite some time instead of actually addressing them right away. So people are having these transmissions fail and complaining about it, and Nissan's sitting there going, yep, we know, but they didn't really do anything about them right away. Nissan's cars are overall fun to drive, and a lot of this comes from the fact that they are lightweight. Well, that lightweight comes to a drawback, and that's really just being tin cans and I'll just say shitboxes at some point. This is especially true of the cars in the 90s, but honestly does carry over to more present day stuff as well.
Holy shit! Is that a shitbox?
If you jump into Nissan and then jump into a competing brand, usually the Nissan feels a bit more hollow without as much substance to it. The plastics aren't as nice and the overall materials just seem a bit more commercial. It's like you're staying in an economy hotel, which is nice, versus a real chain that's known for being good. It just feels different. Going back to the 90s though, there's like nothing to those cars. Compare a 240 or Sentra of that era to something from the competition, and you'll realize just how sparse those cars are. I'm doing a major refresh of my 240 right now, and it's amazing and also scary at just how simple and basic these cars are. Some of the metal in the areas is like a pop can. It's insane. At least it's lightweight and makes it fast though. But I don't want to crash it. I'd die. Speaking of basic, I'm going to throw Infiniti in here as part of the bad section. Their latest stuff has been some of the better stuff, but as a whole, it's a bit underwhelming when it comes to Infiniti. When you compare Infinitis to their competing brands such as Acura and especially Lexus, there just isn't much there. The cars with Infiniti badges usually aren't a giant step up from the top trim level of the same car wearing a Nissan badge. Also, Infiniti QX56 and QX80 are freaking awful. They look like a beluga whale that got stung by a bee. I just can't stand the way those things look. The last bad part of Nissan I want to cover is just what we never got here. This has been beat to death, but the USA not getting stuff like the Skyline, SR20 DET, Pulsar GTIR, and many other models just sucks. We can import these things now, but it's not like having them here because getting parts trying to fix those cars' motors are really hard since we didn't originally have them in the US. Now, let's talk about the worst parts of Nissan. I'm a huge Nissan fan, like I said before, but there are some major flaws a fanboy like me can't just look past. First up is the super slow speed Nissan moves at updating platforms and introducing new cars to the market. A great example of this is the 370Z, which has been in production for over a decade without a ton of major changes. Yes, I know you fanboys out there will point out some of the differences, but to the general public and enthusiasts alike, this is the same car that just costs a lot more money right now to buy versus when it originally came out. Oh yeah, the GTR has also been in production for over a decade without a ton of changes either, but the prices are getting more and more expensive in the GTR. This gets even crazier when you see what else is out there for a similar price. When you look at the 370Z, you can get a Mustang GT for the same price with more features and power, and that pony car can handle now too. The GTR used to be the supercar killer at its initial price point compared to the competition, but now it's really sitting in the supercar price range when you throw some options on it that really everyone wants to have. Another ugly thing is big Ultima energy.
I can tell you got Ultima energy.
It's a phrase those cool kids have been using lately and honestly doesn't really reflect well on Nissan. It really paints them in a bad light where people who drive an Ultima are a little, well, less presentable or predictable. I know this is kind of a joke, but if I were a marketing person at Nissan, I would either embrace this and have some fun with it or try to divert this saying somewhere else because it makes walking in to buy an Ultima a bit of a meme right now. We saved the worst for last though. The ugliest thing about Nissan has got to be the scandal with Nissan CEO or ex-CEO Carlos Ghosn. If you haven't heard of this, it basically involves our buddy Carlos trying to escape, well, sneak out of Japan and get to Lebanon. That seems pretty not good for a company to make headlines in that sort of way. Carlos was not using company funds effectively, or really ethically, or legally, I suppose. We're not talking about a few free company paid lunches here, you know, going out to get pizza for the boys, whatever. We're talking more like paying for some of his swanky residences and other things totaling tens of millions of dollars. There was an arrest, detention, and while out on bail, Carlos escaped from his hotel in a box of audio equipment and boarded a jet to Lebanon to flee Japan and the charges that he was facing. This is a crazy story that's well worth your time to look into, but it's very, very ugly for Nissan having to go through this. It honestly made the company look kind of like a joke as they were going through this, and there wasn't anything new coming out, and they're instead talking about the CEO scandal and press debacle. So let's kind of look at the good, bad, and ugly of Nissan. This is a brand that I truly enjoy, even though they are far from perfect, but their redeeming qualities keep me coming back. I'm excited to see where Nissan is headed in the next few years, especially with the Z and the offerings from the likes of Toyota and Honda getting more and more competitive, and what pressure that puts on Nissan and how they react. Appreciate you guys watching. I'm Sam. Peace.